Late start, but we're gonna have some pros on in just a few minutes. So if you're watching this down the road, just skip on forward. All right, we'll be with you shortly.
If y'all could make your way down, we'll be getting started in the next 2 or 3 minutes. I cannot scroll through. We can just roll in. All right, y'all ready to get started? Yes. All right, so the way that we're going to do this is just a general Q&A session. You ask a question, directed at any of the three of them up here, or directed all three of them if you want to hear all three of their takes on the question. Speak up so they can hear you. If they can't hear you, I'll come to you and reiterate the question for you, okay? So, who's up first?
Me guys. What's that?
The best split ring pliers.
Oh, God. I've got a couple different pair. I don't know which ones are the best. I've got 2 or 3 different ones in the boat. I got a pair of Shimano, 2 or 3 different ones. I don't know.
Texas tackle makes a real good pair. And then, of course, just like everything else in the fishing world, the old stuff is better than the new stuff. You know what I mean? I've got a pair that I've had for over 20 years, and they are money. I've got a new set from them, and they work okay, but they're not quite as good as the old ones, especially when you get to the small split rings. Those are the hardest ones. Yeah, Texas tackle. I think you can. I'm not sure where you get them from. I get them online.
John probably deals with more split crankbaits than any of us.
Yeah. Don Augusta actually makes a new pair. It's like a small one, and the tip of the nose of the pliers is real skinny, so it's good for the smaller ones. Yeah, it's a small set, but they're real thin diameter, so you can get it in between the smaller split rings. So I like them for that.
All right, who's got the next question?
Somebody's got to want to ask something. It ain't even got to be fishing related. I bet Lynn Johnson's got a question.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, the starting thing would be there's got to be bass in the water where you're throwing the jig to catch them. I would say Mr. Cruz would be your best match with him. Do that.
I'm still learning on that live scope. I've had it for a year and a half now, whatever. But it's interesting. It's changed some parts of the bass industry. I've had discussions with people about it before. You know, people are like, oh, it's cheating and this and that. It's not cheating. In my opinion, if you've been fishing for a while, it makes you more excited to go fishing because it's opening up new opportunities to catch fish that you have never really even fished for before. But a lot of those open water fish, there's a bunch of different ways to catch them. A lot of people, they just think jerkbait because they watched Patrick Walters catch 1 million pounds on jerkbaits. So there's a lot of those open water fish. I've seen a lot of jerkbaits now in the more popular lakes. I mean, everybody fishes most all the lakes around here. So a lot of those fish have seen those. So you know you're gonna have to go to more finesse techniques, in my opinion. You know, your Neko rigs and things like that you can fish, wacky worms, things that you can fish in the middle of the water column. One of the things that I'm looking at, I don't want these guys to hear it, but I don't care, they'll be all right. It'll be all right with them. As long as just them know, and then me will be good. But spybait is something that I think is gonna be deadly coming in the future, especially as that forward-facing sonar continues to evolve and you can see fish further and further out. The first generation live scope, you're good to about 50, 60 feet on seeing fish and your bait and everything. If you have it dialed in, the new one you can see 80, 90 feet at least. And then like the active target, you can see 80, 90 feet currently. But some of the other details not as good with that forward-facing stuff. But with bass fishing, it's not like crappie fishing. I mean, you're not crappie fishing anymore if you don't have forward-facing sonar. It's kind of what it seems like. With bass fishing, there are certain opportunities. Like if the shadow's spawning, you don't even cut it off. You don't need it. You don't need it. Cut your hydro wave on, but you don't need that forward-facing sonar. So there's a lot of opportunities, even bed fishing, stuff like that. You don't need it. It's not, you're cranking in muddy water, you don't really need it. A lot of times you don't need it, but open water, the summer and fall, it just opens up more fish to be caught.
100%. I was talking to Kenny Pinnell night before last, but we were talking about crappie fishing with him, and I've gotten the last couple of weeks to do it crappie fishing, and it's just amazing to see a 1/16 or 1/8 ounce crappie jig at 60 foot going to the fish, and you can watch the fish leave the school to come get it. So it's pretty amazing to get. It just takes time on the water and time using it to get comfortable with it, and it'll help you in bass fishing or crappie fishing or whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I can add to what both of them said is even if you can't catch the back to bass fishing, like you can see how your bass are reacting to different baits or different colors. Like at Hartwood, the Classic last week, like I was throwing one color jerk bait and they would follow it, but wouldn't really commit. And I literally changed colors, and like the second one I threw at, like ran like 10 foot from it and ate it. So just figuring stuff like that out, and you like from a brush pile situation, I've seen it happen before. Like you could be throwing a worm or something, and they kind of just get around, mosey around it, and you throw a crankbait through there, and they just jump all over. So just seeing how they react to it, can help you catch them maybe on something else or a different color too.
I use the Lowrance. You probably used them all, haven't you? I'll let him talk about that in just a second. I use the Lowrance. He's got a Humminbird. I think they're all good if you get them dialed in, but I really like mine. And one other thing that I was going to say that it's a really great tool for is seeing your baits. Seeing a crankbait, how deep it runs on 10-pound line versus 15, or seeing your spinner bait or your jig, that crappie jig. I know that in the past, if I would have been fishing the way I've been fishing and catching these fish, that I would have been way above them, wouldn't have let my bait get down to them. Just learning how your bait is in the water column and what it does with different size lines and how different crankbaits, the depths they run. It's just a tool that's going to help us all around, not just necessarily just catching fish, but doing everything else too.
Yeah. All three of them have their qualities. I don't have as much experience with the Humminbird, but from what I've seen, it's catching up to the other ones. The Lowrance has better definition. I feel like it's a narrower cone, 18 degree cone versus the 20 degrees what the Garmin has. But the Garmin, I feel like you can see better detail of what's going on. Like if you look at a brush pile, man, you can see if it's alive. You can see little bait fish and stuff inside of there. You can see individual fish. The Lowrance is much more of a 2D look, but you get a lot of definition in it. And especially that definition goes further out. I think part of that has to do with the cone. Part of it has to do just the way the signal's processed. But both of them are good. I tell people if you already have Lowrance stuff, do active target. If you're kind of independent, you're just going to put it independently on. I like the Garmin, and especially with that new transducer they got coming out. They said you could see clearer even further out, so that's good. I'm looking forward to that. And then Humminbird ain't far behind. I mean, they'll be there. I think they're continuing to. It seems like they're continuing to update the software so that they're processing the signal. I think they've got the ability to see what they need to see. You need to see in the transducer, but it's starting to evolve is what it seems like. You agree with that, Wes?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate to run the first ones there, the prototypes they come out with last year, and I'll be the first one to say it wasn't great. Like you could see some stuff, but I mean, like I was losing my bait out to like 50 feet, but we just come out with this new software, and I've been running it about 2 months, and the water conditions help a lot with any of the ones you're using, but at Hartwell, the water's kind of clear, and I was seeing fish in my jerkbait or drop shot, whatever, at like 90 feet. And I've been in the boat with all 3 different brands, and I'm going to say Humminbird's we're probably right there from a bait tracking and fish standpoint. Now, like the detail in a brush pile, we're not quite there yet. Like you can see the brush pile, but I don't know that you can see bait like swimming around it. You can see dots in it like a fish return. It's going to end up being brighter, but from like an individual limb standpoint, we're not quite there yet. But from a bait tracking and fish seeing, like I don't think there's any difference as of now with the new update. And the next thing with all 3 of the brands is a dedicated wiring harness running from your battery or however else you're powering it. But I run a C-Clear power harness. I don't know what they run, but I'm sure they run a dedicated harness. Just having that big enough gauge wire to have enough voltage going to your thing or your unit all day keeps it, as clear as it can be.
The question was about, being able to adjust your settings on your particular unit so that you can maximize what you're looking at. I know that like on the Garmin, there's about 6 different ways you can set them up to see the same thing. And it's kind of like, are you fishing shallow water, deep water? There's a lot of different settings you can adjust in the Garmin. The Lowrance is pretty much turn it on. You can adjust the contrast a little bit, but from what I've seen, it's pretty much plug and play. If you don't want to have a science degree and have to learn it, the Lowrance is a little easier to use in my opinion. But the Garmin, you can really dial in some certain things so that you can see that life within those brush piles, and that's the reason I still like it. But yeah, I have my depth set on manual so that I can adjust it as I want to see it, based on what I want to see. So not how deep the water is. That's a big thing with it. I haven't seen the current affect any. Now you can see stuff floating in the water though. You can see it go, like you'll be looking out there and you'll see stuff going through it, and that's just debris.
Yeah, the only thing the current's going to do is just get stuff started up in the water sediment, which the sediment, the sonars, the transducer's going to pick that up, thinking back. So you may not have like a crystal clear stream, you know, it may have a haze to it or something, but that's just particles in the water that it's picking up on.
I'm asking too, and people didn't hear before, the depth, John touched on it, but I went to Oklahoma when we first brought out the active target, and we were out in 60 or 80 foot of water, just like you're talking about, and they want to see a crankbait coming back. And you barely pick it up, I mean, no matter what. But if you brought that up, like John said, to like 20 foot, and you're throwing a 15 foot crankbait, the crankbait image is a lot larger on there. So yeah, that's exactly what you were talking about too.
And he did mention one thing, always put your stuff on manual, like the depth, the range. Don't ever have it on auto because it'll just keep jumping around and it won't ever get the clearest image you can get. So like just have it where you can set it to what depth or what range out you want it, and it'll be a lot better picture. Who would have thought this turned into a forward-facing seminar? It's great.
Falling water conditions. I actually like falling water. I do not like rising water as much as I do falling water. Rising water, I try to go to where it's coming from. Like if the water's coming up, I try to go up the river to where it's, or the back of a creek where the water's coming from. The fish would put their nose on the bank. Falling water, fish sort of come out to the, I'm gonna say for instance, I was in a tournament at Kentucky Lake in the spring flipping bushes, all shallow bushes, and catching them everywhere. Water started dropping 2 or 3 inches a day. The fish came out to the deepest bushes, the deepest cover that I could get to that was in that general area. And that's what I look for. Just if I'm fishing grass, I go to where the grass is a little bit deeper or comes out over the edge of the channel a little bit more than it does being a flat, super flat place. So that's my experience of falling water.
Yeah, to me, it's kind of seasonal. In the spring, I kind of like rising water because the fish want to be shallow, and when it's coming up, they're eating, and they're a little more predictable, more patternable. If it's falling in the spring, Scott mentioned it, like you can definitely pattern them, but the window gets a little bit smaller of when they're gonna bite. Now in the fall, I'd rather have falling water than rising water. In the fall, it definitely positions them a lot better to catch. They're gonna come out to the next point. They're gonna come out to, whatever the next depth range is, where there's cover, and set up a little bit better. A little more predictable in the fall. I like that falling water in the fall. Is that why they call it the fall? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they pretty much hit the nail on the head with everything. The only thing that my advice would be is to not be stubborn on a falling water situation, because I've tried to still make the 6 inch. There was a foot that was in out 6 inches. Like I know they still got to be there, but
Guilty.
Yeah, it'll burn you sometimes. And but that would be my only suggestion, is just just don't be stubborn. Get out to the deepest, like Scott said, the deepest cover that they've got set up on. I mean, that's probably where they're going to be most of the time.
Sometimes it may not even be the cover. It could be where the water, if you're on a flat, it just comes out and it falls from 2 to 4 foot or something. That next staging spot would be something besides cover.
Where they feel comfortable at, where they don't think they're going to be on dry land in an hour, pretty much.
Yeah, Wes hit on something too. And this has been my fault. Is that you're fishing over the course of multiple days, or like you might have to fish one weekend and then fish the next weekend. Pay attention to what the water level is. I've done that a number of times where I fished, and then a couple days later, like, I'm gonna go back and hit them bushes, and you go back and like after the third bush, you're like, man, this looks funny, and then you look and you're like, oh crap, man, the water's dropped about a foot, and I didn't even realize it. So now you're like, oh crap, now I've got to totally go back and do it all different. Where am I gonna? I'm gonna pull to the next, point or whatever. It's so I got screwed because I didn't pay attention to it. So pay attention.
Everywhere you fish now has an app on your phone that keeps up with water level, so you can sort of keep up with it that way. And if the water falls 6 inches, you're going to start a new day. You're not going to go back to exactly how you was catching them. You're going to figure it out again. And bass fishing is that way. It's not just figuring them out for this week. It's figuring them out today. Sometimes it's figuring them out hour by hour, and that's who wins the tournament. New body of water, and how do you start patterning? I really enjoy fishing new bodies of water, and it seems like I do a lot better on new bodies of water than I do somewhere that we've been numerous times because I get to fish in history and stuff. But myself, I like to ride, look at water, and find water that looks good to me. I'm a shallow water guy, most of the time. But you can rule that out too if you fish for hours and you haven't seen anything or caught anything, and all the bait fish is out in 10 to 12 foot. I mean, it's seasonal is a big deal. If we're there, you got to pay attention to that. If you're there in the wintertime, fish are going to be on channel swing stuff with deeper water close by. Water temps anywhere from 58 to 70. The fish are going to be trying to spawn, moving back. So a lot of that is seasonal, but then it's also riding and looking at what water clarity is and what looks good to you, because there's so many different ways. That's the great thing about bass fishing, is there's so many different ways to win a tournament on one body of water. Our bodies of water are so dynamic now that a guy could be drop shotting in 20 foot catching them, and I'm up throwing a spinner bait in 6 or 2 foot catching them. So it's doing what you like doing and feeling comfortable with it. But most of putting together a pattern is that knowing what season you're in and what the fish are trying to do by water temp, the weather that we have, the moon phases that are going on. There's so much goes into it that you just have to look at and pay attention to and know what the fish are going to be doing. You want to try to stay ahead of them a little bit is what I try to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll go back to a seminar that I listened to when I was a teenager. It was George Cochran was giving it, and he was talking about new water and seasons and stuff like that. And he broke it. He was a real simple dude. I don't know if I got to know him early on in my career, and he had a real simple philosophy for a lot of stuff. I still think about it today. He said, in the springtime, I fish the lower half of the lake, and in the fall, I fish the upper half of the lake. Like, that was it. And his logic was that in the springtime, those fish at the lower end of the lake, they've got a lot of places to be, but in the spring, all of them are going to hit the bank to spawn at some point in time. So whether it's pre-spawn, spawn, or early post-spawn, there's going to be a big window in the spring where all the fish that live deep and that live out in the middle of the lake and that live in the trees and all that kind of stuff, they're all going to go to the bank at some point in the spring. Now in the fall, they all scatter and they get harder to catch on the lower end. So in the fall, he goes upriver to where you're going to catch more fish shallow. And that was just kind of his philosophy. So if you're going to a new body of water, that might be something to consider as well. Like fall, you might want to look at the upper half. Spring, you might just want to stay on the lower half. It just helps cut the lake down. And then I would apply everything he just said, because he was hitting the nail on the head with a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, Scott was spot on with a lot of it, or pretty much everything he said. The only thing I would, to help you kind of break it down a little bit faster, is to go looking into this lake as to fish your strength. Like if you're a shallow water guy, don't spend the first 6 hours that you're on this new lake looking out deep on humps and looking for brush piles and stuff. Like, go look for what you're comfortable with, try and get a few bites, and then build on it from there. Like, if you looked at tournament weights in the past 6 months at this place and it's taking 20 pounds, and you go fish the bank and your best 5 might weigh 9 or 10, well, you probably know you need to, you know how you can get some bites, but you probably need to adjust and go look at something, because obviously there's better quality fish being caught some different way, or change areas. So that's kind of just one thing to add to that, is just look at it as your strength. And like I said, check tournament weights from these places, because most of that's all on the internet nowadays, and you kind of see what you're getting yourself into when you get there.
Talking about managing our stress for being on the road and just fishing nonstop. It's tough. I keep this bottle of brown water in my truck called bourbon. No, I'm just kidding. It will take the edge off, I'll be honest. No, but a lot of it just has to do with, for me, it has to do with getting in a routine. I have a routine, like getting to a tournament ahead of time. Making sure, I got a routine of like getting all my food for the week, and then kind of getting everything set up so that then the rest of the week is just, wash, rinse, repeat kind of a situation. And that, to me, that helps manage a lot of my stresses. I'm like, oh hell, what am I gonna do for dinner? What am I gonna do for lunch? I've got it all planned out. And, the rest is just going fishing. That's kind of how it works for me.
And if there's any one of the three of us that's got a lot of stress on him, it's that man right there. Because he owns his own company and still is beating us on the Elite Series on the regular. But whatever, everything he just said, having the routine is a really good deal. And the next thing is having, we can't do it by ourselves. We got a lot of support back home, our family, so they're able to, take care of some stuff that's going on at home and get us packed wherever we need to go. Book places to stay. Well, you never, But yeah, looking at places, like I said, trying to find places to stay, places we've never been before, stuff like that. So the support at home helps a lot with the stress, but it doesn't take it all away, that's for sure.
It's easy. You just go by the loft and you can get all the tackle that you need to go to any tournament you want. That's simple. That's simple right there. But it takes a lot of planning. It is a lot of planning as far as the tackle goes, because I'm looking at the schedule, months in advance thinking, and so I'm ordering tackle or buying tackle or going to the loft or whatever to get things that I need. And I might go up there and get some stuff before I leave, but it won't be for CNT. I've had that stuff for a while. I'll be buying stuff for Fork, maybe Pickwick. I might get some stuff for Pickwick here pretty soon, but that's kind of where my mind stays way ahead of where we are.
You have to stay way ahead, but I've got a truckload of tackle. I carry everything with me for just about any lake. Now, like we're going to Santee, and I'm not carrying 6XDs and 10XDs and all that, but I've got it all stored in crates, and I'll take it in the back of the truck. But I pack my boat with what I think I'm going to use for that tournament coming up, and we've been doing it long enough now that probably 80%, 90% of the time now, probably that I don't even get in my truck during practice. Most of the time I've got what I need in the boat. And that's just planning ahead, like he said.
And the crazy thing is, you'll pack all this stuff
in the Order Tackle Warehouse.
And Order Tackle Warehouse 2 days for the tournament, because I gotta have that color worm.
Or get them to overnight it from somewhere else.
That's for sure. Pretty much. A lot of it with the stuff that's packed in our trucks, like they said, I probably don't ever touch it, but the one time I got to go in there, I probably didn't bring it most of the time.
Each off season, I go through and I have all the stuff that goes in the truck. I go through it and cull out a bunch of stuff and update it, and learn I need more green pumpkin D-bombs or put it, whatever it is. I'll go through there and I do that every off season, and usually it ends up happening like 2 weeks before I leave for the first tournament. It always just gets put off, but that's usually how I do that. But yeah, staying ahead of it's the biggest key to keeping all the tackle and stuff you need. But it never fails. You end up hitting your network or roommates or whatever. Like, dude, do you have a 3 to 8 want to one of these. But I was just joking with Scott because he's got a jig for every season, and that's what he's gonna end up catching them on anyway. I don't care what he says, he's gonna catch them on a jig.
I think I had to call you my rookie year at a Gunnersville tournament, seeing if you had a few packs of extra bait. So like, just reiterate, we bring all that stuff, and you're still calling your buddies. So, and that's the cool thing about the elites. Most of the guys, if you need something, they'll lend it to you. I mean, we're fishing against each other, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to make a living too, to pay our bills and support our families too.
Next.
Anybody got a bank beating question that don't have to do with a forward-facing sonar?
There you go.
You find fish shallow all week leading up to a day like today. Cold, windy, snow, rain, all night. What do you do when you go out to start the tournament?
If you found fish, he said, for instance, this week, if you was fishing shallow and found fish all week, caught some shallow, and then it got cold and windy, what do? I'm going to fish shallow. I mean, they're not going to leave overnight just because it got cold. They would more likely to leave if the water fell 6 inches than they would be because it got cold. This time of year, those fish are moving shallow to do one thing. They're moving up there to spawn. And once they once they commit and make a move, they pretty much stay. I've caught them off the bed at Seminole with 26 degrees with frost all over the boat and everything. Once they commit and make that move, it seems to me like they're going to stay long as the water conditions don't change. The water was 62 degrees out here yesterday, I don't know what it is. We just say it was 60 degrees. And it got cold and windy last night. It's probably 59 this morning, 50 at the surface temp. I mean, it probably fell a couple of degrees, but you know, a couple of feet deep, it didn't change it at all. Now, a run in or something like that where you got super cold water running in, it may change that a little bit more than it would something on, you know, away from the run in or something. But I would stay shallow all day. Sometimes these days are the best days. They really seem to bite.
Yeah, he said snow they bite, and that's a fact. But what I've seen has been accurate with what he said. Sometimes you have to alter your bait selection. You might have caught him on a big spinnerbait and a jig, all deep, or maybe a square bill, and then maybe you have to drop back to like some little, like a little finesse crankbait, Little John or Shad Rap or something. You might have to drop back that way, and then you can still catch them. They just got off of it a little bit. Maybe instead of flipping that jig, you got to flip around some kind of straight worm with a lighter weight and just really milk it in there, and then you can still get those bites. But you might have to tweak your baits a little bit because they're not quite in that same mood. They just got whacked in the head a little bit.
And that's conditions. I mean, we had post-frontal conditions when you was finding these fish as the front was approaching. Probably had a little cloud cover and stuff, and now that the front's gone, it's bluebird skies, and you're having to change up the way you were catching them to something more finesse.
And your number of bites are probably going to go down. Like if you went down the stretch and had, let's say you got 12 bites down a 200-yard stretch, your bites may get cut in half. But that's just because, like Scott said, the condition-wise, like they're not just going to be feeding with it being bluebird skies now in 30 degrees. But there gets a time, I feel like there gets a time with them shallow fish, like especially this time of year, where he said when they commit to the bank, they're going to be there, regardless of what happens. Now they may not bite as good, and your bites may go in half, but probably this time of year with these conditions, if you do get a bite, it's probably going to be a big one on shallow. Like there's not going to be a bunch of bucks around running up there just biting like crazy.
Yeah, it's quality bites. What Scott was saying, as weird as it sounds, sometimes it's an afternoon deal when the front comes through, but sometimes they bite right at first light. I mean, cold as crap, and you think, man, I'll be lucky to get a bite, and you throw over there, and the next thing you know, one jerks it broad out of your hand. Like, wow! And in that first 30 minutes, you might catch 2 or 3 or 4, and then it dies. It's a weird deal. It's about that, I don't know, something about that low light and triggers it, even in the cold.
Some of the coldest mornings I've ever fished, like the first hour, hour and a half is normally really good, and then it'll get bad, and then around 1 or 2 o'clock you got about another hour, and you'll notice that it'll be like pretty obvious, like or you can literally go back to another stretch you just fished 2 hours ago, and it's just like bam, 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 bam. And they never go nowhere. It just, I don't know, they don't like that pressure change. I know biologists, but it makes sense.
You're an observationist. That's what I am. Go-to bait in the springtime. It depends on if I'm trying to cover water or if I'm trying to catch them. if I had to pick one bait in the springtime, probably be shallow running crankbait, especially pre-spawn. Pre-spawn bait, Little John's probably my #1 choice. But if I'm trying to find them, it's good for catching them as well. But then if I'm trying to catch them, I'll probably, believe it or not, a missile-based destroyer, a big creature bait. There's something about that big bait, that pre-spawn. It's got a big presence. I don't know. I like it that pre-spawn and spawn. It's a tough one to beat. I'll throw it just as much as a deep line.
My favorite pre-spawn or springtime bait, probably. We talk about springtime. We're gonna say, upper 50-degree water. I like to fish. Depending on where I'm at. If I'm on the Cushy River, I like to throw spook a lot. I just like to see them hit top water, and this time of year, you can go to Logan Martin, Lay Lake, Neely Henry, anywhere and throw a spook nearly all day and get bit when you get around them. It's really, really good. But a great bait, search bait, is chatterbait. I mean, a vibrating jig, water temp below 55, I'll throw a red one a lot. If it gets above that, I'm gonna throw black and blue or shad color, and just cover a lot of water with it.
Yeah, I'm 100% on the vibrating.
Then I'm gonna fish a jig.
No, surely not. The vibrating jig's hard to beat, literally any time of the year, but springtime especially is when it really excels. And like you said, if the water gets below 55, a flat-sided crankbait's really good, and I'll always have a jig in my hand too. You're not gonna take a lot of bites on it, but if you get one, it's probably gonna be alright. Now, I will say there is a time in the springtime, just reiterating on that, where, like John said, that destroyer or some kind of creature, plastic bait, where a plastic will get a lot more bites than a jig. Like when they really start focusing on spawning, I'll lay the jig down and flip a Texas rig plastic.
I've gotten beat several times, just like I can call several tournaments. You follow, I got on the best jig bite. One of the best jig bites I've ever been on, practicing for a BFL. 2 days, for like Wednesday and Thursday, could have had well over like 25 flipping a jig. And then I could not get a bite on it come Saturday, but we had a full moon on Friday. It's like he said, once those fish, if they're moved up, they're wanting to spawn, they're aggressive, they're eating everything in sight. But once they go on the bed and spawn, jig bite sort of falls off most of the time. It's really, they like a plastic, something that falls a lot slower a lot of times. Even if you go to a Cinco or something like that, a brush hog, baby brush hog, something that's real light, a lighter weight on a baby pocket crawl, something that's small, some sort of plastic, pick your favorite and go with it. Once they go on the bed and start spawning. Up to 2 days before that though, the jig bite can be unbelievable.
Yeah, I've got my butt handed to me. Like people come behind me, might catch them, and I'm not like around here like Neely Henry Wise and stuff, like it'll change like a light switch and you're like, yeah, probably missed that one.
I've seen that the immediate post-spawn is the same way. Like they just get off, unless it's a swim jig, it's a little different bite, but
What
if
is
you're
that?
talking about the fishing jig, you can explain that, you can do a whole seminar on that with. But yeah, the jig bite versus a plastic is crazy. It is crazy in that immediate post-spawn. And then a couple weeks after that, it's almost like they'll swim across the cove to eat the jig versus anything else. It's like once they're recovered from that spawn and they're done, man, like they want that big old whopper again. They want that big meal.
Another great bait in the springtime, once fish are spawning or something, and it's sort of to me, I think it's sort of gotten overlooked a little bit in the past several years, but it used to be really popular. I still throw it a lot. The floating worm, these off the colors, the pinks and the thiolates, yellow, those floating worms are really, really good springtime around the spawn when fish are spawning.
I may have weighed a couple at the classic on floating worm. Maybe.
I hope you didn't tie it on for next week because you won't need it. I'll just throw that out there. You don't
I actually took them out of my boat.
Good. You can just put them up there and they'll sell them for you.
That floating worm's a little bit, it's not a secret, but it doesn't get utilized by near as many people.
I've been roasted by that thing as well. So it's not you have to definitely fish the conditions. It's one of those things like we were talking about the rising falling water earlier. On rising water, they like it. Falling water, not as much. And I've been burnt by it. you get a little bit of cold front for some reason, and they forget that it even exists. A little bit of a warming trend, and fish start suspending. I think that the sun brings them up, warm brings them up, and then it's like, but you can throw it out in the middle of the pocket, and they'll swim over there and eat it. I think they like it on the rising water when they're going shallow. I think so, yeah.
My opinion, post spawn fish, like I love fishing a poplar, P70, big poplar and stuff like that. Post spawn, say May around here pretty much. And if you have rising water that time of year, those fish have already done their thing. And for some reason, rising water, they don't want, like it gets too much water over their head, they don't want to come up and hit the top water as much post spawn as they will. Like right now, if you got rising water, fish are going to follow it up. Right then, they're going to stay where they're at, and if you put another 6 inches over their head, they won't hit the top water. You may have to go to a flipping bait or something like that. That wasn't a question, but I just thought I'd bring it up.
The classic that being my first one, I feel like I was very fortunate for it to be at Lake Hartwell because the fans over there were, pretty incredible from what I got told. Like, our crowds at Blast Off were amazing. Like, there was just people literally everywhere, like where we were putting our boats in, where we were taking off from. So just being able to experience that was a blessing. And then getting to ride through that arena, to weigh in some little green fish that swim around is pretty cool and have people cheer for you. I mean, dude, bass fishing's not a real job. Like, it shouldn't be considered a real job. Like, honestly, like we get to go catch fish for a living, and yeah, we back to another one because I really liked it because I went into the tournament with a whole different mindset than an elite tournament because you didn't have to fish scared, like knowing if you were going to catch some to get some good points or something. So you could kind of, I did pretty well considering my practice, but I didn't fish to like finish 23rd. Like I fished to win it, and I finished 23rd, so that's what happened. But all the 54 guys that were there, John, me, Canterbury at the last one, he'll be at the next one, I know for a fact, and we all go into it trying to win. So that's the cool thing about that deal. I feel like I've heard Hank Cherry say it, and I would say he's one to listen to. It's one of the easiest tournaments to win, but the hardest to make it to because your odds are in your favor. Because you're literally fishing against half the field that we normally do, but to get there is really the hardest part.
I poured my own jigs for several years. He had a question about vertical or horizontal line ties on a jig. And I tied my own jigs for several years before, and I've been with Dirty Jigs for 15 years now. But it depends on what you're doing. If you're fishing vegetation, I like a vertical line tie. 100%. I tied a bass jig mold for myself that I flipped docks, did everything with for 20 years. And I had a vertical line tie. Some people like a horizontal for hookup ratio, and it sort of pins them right through the nostril a little bit better when you're flipping, like close range flipping. If you're actually flipping and your hook set is straight up and down, and that a lot of that has to do with your hook set too, because some people set the hook sideways. I try to come straight up all the time. So if I'm up close flipping heavy cover, and there's, if it's rock or if it's wood, I like a horizontal line tie. But if there's any vegetation at all, I still like a vertical line tie. I've caught them on both, and I've caught like probably my share flipping, and I've always liked the vertical line tie, and up until 6 or 7 years ago, I started experimenting with a horizontal more just for hookup ratios. But to me, it really hasn't made that big a difference. It does hook them through the top of the mouth a little bit better sometimes, and I think you don't lose them, but I like both. But just finding the right, a lot of that has to do with the surface area on the head of the jig as far as getting bites. Your displacement of water as your bait's falling. Whatever you do, if you're flipping, make sure you got a vertical fall with your jig. If you're swimming, you add your action, so you definitely want a vertical line tie. Wes is a good, he ties his own jigs some. He uses dirty jigs. He probably likes both too.
I do, and like me and Canterbury, we used to pour our own jigs, and I still use some of my poured stuff depending on the situation, but I am with dirty jigs, and 90% of the time, if I'm flipping just river bank flipping wood, grass, I'll use a vertical. The only time I've become real keen with the horizontal is as a horizontal line type jig I've used, and I've had real good success with it. It is a really good hookup ratio jig, but I just like that vertical line tie. I just grew up doing it. That's just what I'm comfortable with.
I sell jigs, so I put whatever I think is going to sell the best in it, or whatever Iconelli tells me to, because he's the one that signs off on it.
Man, they getting into the juicy stuff right now. Yeah, that's right. Most of the even some of the dirty jig stuff, I'll take the silicone skirt off and tie a rubber jig. It depends on the water temperature and just kind of the rate of fall that I want, but I'll have both. A lot of times I'll have both tied on, and sometimes they'll bite with either one. It doesn't really matter, and then sometimes they like the round rubber better than the silicone. But 90% of the time, I'm probably going to be using the round rubber. That's just a personal preference, really.
It gives you a little bulkier profile most of the time. I like, depends on what I'm doing, but just like he said, like if I'm flipping docks or something that's pressured, I like a slimmer profile. We got skirts now that are a lot thinner cut. The thin cut material seems to flow in the water a lot better, and it lays down better on your jig when it's in the water. I love that skirt material better than, for say, a real coarse rubber material. A lot of people are using big, I don't even know what you call it, the big round rubber now, and it gives you a flared out deal. So it just depends on what you're doing. Like if you're mock jig fishing, you want that bigger profile than you do if you're, depending on how you're fishing. So if you're fishing around pressure fishing, I like the silicone, the new silicone. That's a lot thinner cut. It's about half the size of the old silicone. I think y'all have that on a bunch of y'all's jigs now, and I just like that material. It's something that they've changed over the years. All skirt material is getting hard to get.
Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah, our new mini swim jig is the same. We have that fine cut skirt material on their mini swim jig, and it's the same skirt size and material that's on our mini flip jig. Missile jigs, they got them up there. But if you want a little small compact swim jig, that's what they got, the little mini swim jig. That's a bad dude, and we haven't been through like a swim jig season with that. But so I'm looking forward to hearing all the stories about the fish being caught on that little mini swim jig. You need a little limit getter to swim that thing around that Coosa River grass. Tie good knots on it.
Take it away from you. You don't want it to move. Alrighty, guys, that's going to wrap up this Q&A session. We're going to do a little bit of giveaways here in just a minute. I hate to cut these guys short, but every one of them's got about a 6-hour drive ahead of them this afternoon.
Yeah, we'll be hanging out for a few minutes if you got any more questions or anything you didn't want to ask publicly.
Yeah, anything that y'all want to ask them in depth, you can pull them off the side and answer those questions. They'll answer those questions for you.
I got a box of stuff over here I'm just going to give out, and whoever can have it, just get what you want. But they got a lot of gifts here from both sides.
Yep, we're going to get started on some giveaway stuff here in just a second. But any more questions y'all got for these guys, hit them up with them quick. They've all got a 6-hour drive ahead of them. We want them to get out here as soon as they can.
All right, for you guys online, thanks for joining us. We got 1 or 2 more seminars later on today. We're talking with some guys fish locally, John Cox from the National Professional Fishing League, and then we got a couple of kayak guys. I won't let you or make you sit through watching the raffle drawings and all that kind of stuff. But if you're in the area, we're going to be here all afternoon, so come on down. Thanks again for watching, and keep that notification on, and we'll see you later on today. Thanks, guys.